Dear friends, in every age, people have wrestled with the same profound question. Can faith and reason truly coexist? Some believe faith is blind, a comfort for the weak. Others see reason as cold, cutting away all mystery. But what if faith and reason are not enemies, but two wings of the same soul, lifting humanity closer to truth? Centuries ago, Karl Marx declared, "Religion is the opium of the people." He saw faith as an illusion, a tranquilizer for the oppressed. But what if Marx mistook the symptom for the cure? What if faith was never meant to dull our minds, but to awaken our hearts? When I lived in the West, I often walked into bookstores filled with self-help manuals, psychology guides, and spiritual memoirs. And there, among them, I would find works by Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, beside shelves of books about the Dalai Lama. These spiritual teachers captivated millions of Americans, not because they offered easy answers, but because they taught one simple truth: a good religion makes you a better human being. When a journalist once asked the Dalai Lama, "Which religion is the best?" he smiled and said, "The best religion is the one that brings you closer to God, that makes you more compassionate, more kind, more human." That answer, simple as it was, mirrors the heart of Christ's message. For Jesus too said, "A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit." Faith, then, is not measured by temples, doctrines, or rituals, but by the fruits of love and mercy it bears in our lives. Religion becomes bad not when it's too mystical, but when it forgets its purpose: to transform hearts. In the United States today, surveys show fewer people identify with organized religion. And yet, the hunger for meaning, the desire to believe in something beyond the visible, has never been stronger. Americans may leave the church pews, but they flock to meditation retreats, spiritual podcasts, and philosophy videos on YouTube. Why? Because deep down, every human heart still seeks transcendence, something greater than itself. That search is what Pope John Paul II called the restless heart of humanity. In his encyclical Fides et Ratio, he wrote that faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. Without both, we cannot fly. Reason alone leaves us grounded in logic. Faith alone drifts without direction. Together, they lift us toward wisdom. But how does this play out in real life? In America, a scientist may look through a telescope and say, "I see the beginning of the universe." A believer looks at the same stars and whispers, "I see the hand of God." Different languages, perhaps, but the same awe, the same wonder. Faith does not cancel reason. It completes it. Reason asks how. Faith asks why. Reason seeks structure. Faith gives meaning. When both unite, we find not superstition, but understanding illuminated by love. John Henry Newman, one of the greatest minds of Christian thought, once said that reason and faith are not two separate acts, but two movements of one and the same mind. He meant that the human intellect is designed to seek, but the human heart is designed to believe. Together they form the full picture of who we are. And yet, this harmony doesn't come easily. Modern culture often celebrates skepticism as intelligence and mocks belief as naivete. But real courage, my friends, is not in doubting everything. It's in daring to trust. Because trust requires vulnerability. And vulnerability opens the door to encounter. Perhaps faith is not the opium Marx thought it was. Perhaps it is the oxygen of the soul, the breath that gives life to reason, purpose, and hope. Look around today's America. The rush of productivity, the noise of social media, the endless scroll of information. People are connected, but lonelier than ever. They have everything, yet still feel empty. That emptiness, I believe, is not a failure of progress, but a cry of the spirit for something eternal. Faith is that quiet voice in the heart saying, "You are not alone. You were made for more." It's not about escaping the world, but about transforming it. One act of love, one heartbeat of compassion at a time. So the next time someone says, "Religion is the opium of the people," remember this: an opium dulls the senses, but true faith sharpens them. Opium closes the eyes, faith opens them to see beyond pain, beyond fear, beyond death. For faith and reason together lead us not into fantasy but into reality, the deeper, divine reality that gives life its meaning. And in that truth, we find freedom. Freedom to think, freedom to love, freedom to live fully, fearlessly, faithfully. Because faith that fears reason isn't faith at all, and reason that denies faith is half blind. Only together can they reveal the beauty of the human soul and the face of the God who made it. Dear friends, there's a moment in every life when silence becomes louder than words. When we stop running, stop proving, stop pretending, and we simply look at ourselves. Not through the filter of achievement, not through the reflection of social media, but through the quiet mirror of the soul. And that's where the real journey begins. In our world today, we are constantly surrounded by noise. The news, our phones, the endless race to be seen, to be validated. But have you ever paused to ask, who am I when no one is watching? That question, simple as it sounds, is one of the most powerful spiritual awakenings a person can experience. The Bible says, the truth will set you free. But before truth frees us, it often humbles us. Because the first truth we must face is the truth about ourselves. In ancient philosophy, Socrates said, "Know thyself." Centuries later, St. Augustine echoed, "Lord, let me know myself that I may know you." Both understood a profound reality. To truly meet God, we must first dare to meet our own hearts. In modern America, therapy and self-help have become part of everyday conversation. And that's a good thing. People are learning to open up, to heal, to talk about pain. But the spiritual journey goes even deeper. It's not only about understanding our emotions, it's about discovering who we are in the eyes of the one who made us. Imagine standing before a mirror that doesn't reflect your flaws, your failures, or your fears, but your truest self, the one God sees. That's what prayer really is. It's not just talking to God, it's allowing God to talk to you. And sometimes what he says is not loud or dramatic. It's a whisper. You are loved, you are forgiven, you are mine. In John Henry Newman's writings, he spoke of the conscience as the aboriginal vicar of Christ, the voice of God speaking within the human heart. It's not a voice of condemnation, but a call to authenticity, a reminder that we were not made to live divided lives, one version of ourselves in public, another in private. When the outer life and the inner life align, that's where peace is born. In America today, we love the idea of reinvention. We change jobs, cities, styles, even names, searching for a fresh start. But real transformation doesn't happen by moving somewhere new. It happens when we let grace move within us. The 20th century philosopher Edith Stein, a Jewish woman who became a Catholic nun and was martyred during the Holocaust, wrote that the soul is the place where God reveals himself most intimately. Even in the darkest prison, she found freedom through that truth. Because when you discover who you are in God, the world can no longer define you. It's easy to believe God exists, but it's much harder to believe that he loves you personally, with all your imperfections, contradictions, and unfinished stories. And yet, that's exactly what faith calls us to do. Faith isn't about escaping our humanity, it's about redeeming it. Think about this. When Michelangelo carved the statue of David, he said he didn't create the beauty. He simply removed the excess marble to reveal the figure hidden within. That's what God does with us. He chisels away the fear, the pride, the guilt, until our true selves emerge in his light. Sometimes this process hurts. Sometimes it feels like loss. But even in our breaking, God is creating something beautiful. For he is not a distant sculptor. He is the hands that hold the clay, the breath that gives it life. Friends, every time you face your weaknesses, every time you choose honesty over image, forgiveness over bitterness, compassion over judgment, you're letting that divine mirror reflect something truer, deeper, and more radiant. And the world needs that reflection. Because we live in a time when image often replaces identity. We curate our lives for likes, But we forget that love cannot be measured by numbers. God doesn't scroll through our profiles. He looks straight into our hearts. He doesn't ask for perfection. He asks for truth. That's why prayer and reflection are not outdated rituals. They are acts of spiritual rebellion in a culture that fears silence. To be still in front of God is to reclaim your soul from the noise of the world. And when we finally look into that mirror, the one polished not by vanity but by grace, we see that we were never alone. Behind every scar, every mistake, every tear, there was always someone waiting, whispering, "You are still worthy of love." As we close this chapter, remember, the most important relationship you will ever have is not with your success, your reputation, or even your dreams, but with the one who knows you completely and still calls you his own. The mirror of the soul does not show perfection. It shows redemption. And in that moment, when we finally see ourselves through God's eyes, everything changes. We begin to live not in fear of who we are, but in gratitude for who we are becoming. That is the miracle of divine love. It doesn't demand that we be flawless before it finds us. It finds us and then makes us whole. Dear friends, there's a kind of pain that time alone cannot heal. A pain that doesn't appear on X-rays or leave visible scars. It lives quietly in the heart, the wound of betrayal, injustice, rejection, or regret. And though the years move forward, something inside us remains stuck in that moment, whispering, "I will never forgive." Forgiveness. It's one of the most beautiful yet misunderstood words in any language. Some see it as weakness, others as surrender. But forgiveness is neither. Forgiveness is strength. The strength to release what is breaking you from within. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who endured the deep wounds of apartheid, once said, "Without forgiveness, there is no future." He knew that forgiveness does not erase history. It redeems it. It doesn't deny the pain, it transforms it into wisdom. Forgiveness is not pretending something didn't happen. It's choosing not to let what happened destroy who you are. In the American story, forgiveness has always been a revolutionary act. Think of Martin Luther King Jr., standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, preaching love in the face of hate. He understood that vengeance might win battles, but only love can win the war for the human soul. Forgiveness, he said, is not an occasional act, it is a permanent attitude. And yet forgiveness can feel impossible. When someone has shattered our trust, every instinct demands balance, justice, payback. Our hearts whisper, "They should suffer like I did." But forgiveness isn't about what they deserve. It's about what you deserve, peace. Modern psychology echoes this truth. Studies from Stanford and Johns Hopkins show that holding on to resentment increases stress, blood pressure, and depression. But when we forgive, our nervous system calms, our sleep improves, and our immune system strengthens. It's as if the body itself understands the language of grace. Forgiveness, in that sense, is medicine, not for the offender, but for the wounded. Jesus never said forgiveness would be easy. He simply showed that it was possible. Hanging on the cross, he prayed, "Father, forgive them." In that moment, love became stronger than cruelty. Faith became stronger than fear, and the impossible became the path to salvation. Pope John Paul II, in Fides et Ratio, wrote that some truths cannot be understood by logic alone, they must be lived. Forgiveness is one of them. Reason says they don't deserve it. Faith says, neither did we, and yet God forgave us. That is the divine logic of love. Forgiveness is not a one-time act, it's a process. A slow, steady letting go, like untying a knot that's been in place for years. Sometimes you loosen it easily, sometimes it tightens again. But every time you try, the rope of bitterness weakens and the light of peace grows stronger. Forgiveness doesn't mean saying what happened was okay. It means saying, I refuse to let it define my life anymore. It's the moment when a victim becomes free, not because the pain disappears, but because it no longer controls them. I once read the story of a woman who lost her husband in the 9/11 attacks in New York. For years, anger consumed her. One morning she said, "I realized I was still trapped in that tower, not in body, but in spirit, and the only way out was forgiveness." She didn't forgive because she stopped hurting. She forgave because she wanted to live again. Forgiveness, then, is not a feeling, it's a decision. You may not feel peace right away, but the decision opens a door, and God's grace walks through it. In time, the heart heals and joy quietly returns. In today's culture of outrage, where every mistake becomes a headline and every argument becomes a war, forgiveness is a radical act of hope. To forgive is to say, "You will not steal my joy. You will not dictate my story." It's reclaiming power, dignity, and humanity. It's rewriting the ending with compassion instead of anger. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Everyone thinks forgiveness is a lovely idea until they have something to forgive." He was right. It's easy to admire forgiveness from a distance, but when pain becomes personal, forgiveness becomes the hardest sermon to live. And yet, if we could see what happens to the soul when it truly forgives, how the darkness lifts and light floods in, we would never withhold it again. Forgiveness does not end justice, it perfects it. For justice without mercy is revenge, but mercy without justice is denial. Forgiveness is the meeting point where truth and love embrace. So if you're carrying a wound tonight, maybe this is your invitation. Not to forget, not to excuse, but to release, to give yourself permission to be free. Because forgiveness isn't a gift for others. It's the key that unlocks your own prison. And when you finally forgive, heaven itself rejoices. Because in that moment, the love that formed the universe finds a home again, right inside your heart. That isn't weakness, that's resurrection. Dear friends, life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. One moment, everything feels stable, the job, the family, the plans for the future, and then suddenly a storm hits. The diagnosis, the betrayal, the loss, the moment that leaves you breathless and asking, "Why, God?" We all know what it feels like to stand in the rain, wondering if the clouds will ever break. But what if peace is not the absence of storms? What if peace is learning how to stand in the rain without losing faith? In the Gospel, when Jesus calmed the storm, his disciples were terrified. The winds roared, the waves crashed, and in their fear they cried, "Lord, don't you care that we're perishing?" Jesus stood, spoke to the wind, and said, "Peace, be still." And immediately the sea became calm. But the real miracle wasn't the silence of the storm, it was the awakening of trust inside their hearts. In a culture like ours, where we are trained to control everything, from schedules to careers, from appearances to emotions, surrender feels unnatural. We live in an age of self-reliance, where strength is measured by independence. But storms remind us that there are things we cannot fix, predict, or prevent. They strip away illusion and force us to confront the truth. We were never meant to face life alone. That truth is uncomfortable and liberating, because it means peace doesn't come from mastering life's chaos, but from trusting the one who stands above it. Faith doesn't promise smooth seas, it promises a steady hand when the waves rise. I remember once speaking to a man in New Orleans who had lost everything during Hurricane Katrina. His house, his job, his sense of security, gone in a single week. But when I met him years later, he said something I'll never forget. "Before the storm, I thought I knew what faith was, but it wasn't until the waters took everything I had that I realized God was all I needed." That, my friends, is not despair. That is resurrection in disguise. Peace is not found by escaping pain, it's found by embracing presence. The quiet awareness that God is still with us, even when nothing else makes sense. As the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once said, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. Faith gives us the courage to keep walking forward when the past still hurts, and the future is unclear. In Fides et Ratio, Pope John Paul II spoke about the drama of the human condition, that tension between freedom and dependence, between knowing and mystery. He wrote that reason without faith becomes anxious, and faith without reason becomes blind. In times of crisis, we need both: the reasoning that helps us act wisely, and the faith that keeps us from despair. Together, they form the anchor that holds when everything else falls apart. Modern science also echoes this truth. Harvard research shows that people who practice prayer or meditation during times of distress display lower stress levels and higher resilience. The brain literally rewires itself toward calm and hope. Peace, then, is not something you wait for. It's something you cultivate, moment by moment, breath by breath. Maybe that's why so many Americans today, even those who don't identify with religion, are searching for spiritual grounding. Because deep down, we all want a center, something stable when the world shakes. And faith, whether whispered in a church or felt in a quiet morning sunrise, gives that stability. It's not an escape from life's storms, it's an anchor in them. There's a song many of us know, "It Is Well With My Soul." It was written in the 1800s by Horatio Spafford, who lost his 4 daughters in a shipwreck. As he crossed the same ocean where they died, he wrote, "When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul." That hymn wasn't born from comfort, but from heartbreak transformed by faith. It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful praise comes not from joy, but from pain surrendered to love. We all face different storms: physical illness, mental struggle, financial loss, the slow grief of disappointment. And sometimes, the hardest storms are invisible: anxiety, loneliness, the quiet feeling of being unseen in a world obsessed with noise. But peace is not the privilege of the fortunate. It's the promise of the faithful. It's available even in the darkest night. In modern America, we often define success by control: mastering circumstances, achieving goals, climbing ladders. But real peace begins when we stop asking, "How do I control the storm?" and start asking, "Who is in the boat with me?" The answer, of course, is Emmanuel, God with us, the one who never promised a stormless life, but who promised never to leave our side. The storms of life can either break us or bless us. They can destroy our faith or deepen it. The choice lies in where we turn our eyes. If we look only at the waves, we sink. But if we look toward the one who walks on water, we rise. Maybe the peace we've been searching for isn't found in fixing everything around us, but in being still enough to hear that same voice Jesus spoke long ago: "Peace, be still." And in that silence, we realize the storm was never the enemy. Fear was, and love has already conquered it. When we walk through the storm with God, we don't come out the same. We come out stronger, softer, more compassionate, no longer afraid of the rain, because we've learned who holds the sky. And when you've walked through enough storms and found peace still waiting for you, you stop asking, "Why me?" and begin whispering, "Thank you, Lord, because even here, you are with me." Dear friends, if there's one thing our world never stops needing, it is compassion. Not pity, not charity, but that deep, sacred movement of the heart that says, "Your pain is my pain, your joy is my joy." Compassion is love wearing shoes, walking into the places where others are afraid to go. When we look around today's world, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. Wars, injustice, inequality, and silent suffering are everywhere. Even in prosperous nations, there's an epidemic of loneliness. People surrounded by crowds yet starved for connection. In the United States, surveys show that over half of adults feel isolated or unseen. Technology has made us more connected than ever, but not necessarily more caring. And that is why compassion isn't just a virtue. It's a revolution of the heart. Jesus didn't simply preach compassion, he embodied it. He touched the leper when others stepped back. He ate with the outcasts when others turned away. He saw the invisible, loved the unlovable, and dignified those the world had forgotten. And he left us one commandment that still echoes through every century: love one another as I have loved you. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis writes that compassion is not a feeling to be scheduled but a way of living. He calls it a culture of encounter, meeting people not through screens or statistics, but face to face, heart to heart. He warns that indifference is the new form of blindness, a quiet virus that numbs our conscience. And the only cure, he says, is to draw near, to see, to listen, and to act. In America, we admire independence. We teach our children to stand tall, chase dreams, and build success. But if we're honest, sometimes we forget that true greatness is not measured by what we achieve, but by how we love. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" That question is not a burden, it's a doorway. Because when we serve, we don't just change the world changes us. I once met a volunteer nurse in Los Angeles who had spent 20 years working with the homeless. When I asked her what kept her going, she smiled and said, "Because every time I touch a wounded body, I feel God reminding me that I'm touching something sacred." That's compassion, not a theory, but a theology written in action. Compassion doesn't mean fixing everyone's problems. It means being present in their pain. Sometimes the greatest ministry we can offer is not our words, but our presence. A hand held, a tear shared, a silence respected. We are never more like Christ than when we choose to love without condition and serve without reward. And yet, compassion requires courage, because to truly love means to be vulnerable. It means opening our hearts to the suffering of others and risking being changed by it. That's why so many people keep their distance. They fear that feeling deeply will hurt too much. But indifference is far more dangerous than pain. Pain can heal. Indifference kills what's human inside us. The philosopher Henry Nouwen once wrote that compassion is not just bending toward the poor, it is recognizing our shared poverty. We are all wounded. We are all in need of grace. When we see that, compassion stops being an act of charity and becomes an act of truth. In a world obsessed with competition, compassion teaches cooperation. In a culture that glorifies power, compassion celebrates gentleness. It's countercultural, radical, and redemptive. It reminds us that strength isn't in domination, it's in tenderness. Science, too, has caught up with this truth. Neuroscientists at Stanford found that practicing compassion actually rewires the brain, increasing empathy, lowering anxiety, and improving emotional resilience. It turns out that when Jesus said, "Love your neighbor," he wasn't just saving souls, he was saving minds and bodies too. If we want to heal our divided world, it starts not with governments or policies, but with hearts. Every time we forgive instead of retaliate, listen instead of argue, give instead of hoard, we become living proof that love still works. That's how light spreads. One act, one choice, one heart at a time. But compassion also asks us to see beyond borders. It's easy to love those who look like us, think like us, believe like us. True compassion begins when we love those who don't. When we cross boundaries of politics, race, religion, and nation, not to erase differences, but to embrace humanity. Because before we are anything else, Democrat or Republican, American or foreign, believer or doubter, we are children of the same God. So maybe the question for our generation is not, what can I gain? But whose life can I touch? Maybe the path to peace is not found in bigger weapons or louder arguments, but in smaller acts of kindness multiplied 1,000,000 times over. Every time you choose empathy over apathy, generosity over greed, compassion over comfort, heaven takes notice. You become the hands of God reaching out into a wounded world. You become a reflection of divine love in a culture desperate to feel it. And the miracle is this: when you pour yourself out in love, you never run empty, because the God who is love himself keeps refilling your heart. To live with compassion is not to escape suffering. It's to transform it into grace. It's to believe that no act of love is ever wasted, no tear unseen, no kindness forgotten. It's to believe that we too are part of God's healing plan for the world. So when you see pain around you, Don't turn away. Lean in. Be the light that listens, the heart that stays, the hand that helps. For every act of compassion is a prayer made visible. And through those prayers, the world slowly begins to heal. Dear friends, every generation faces its own uncertainty. For our grandparents, it was war. For our parents, it was economic struggle. For us, it is a mixture of everything. Technology changing faster than our hearts can follow, the earth warming, communities fracturing, faith being questioned. And in the middle of it all, one question remains. Is there still hope? Hope is a strange and sacred thing. It is invisible, yet it sustains life itself. It doesn't erase fear, but it outlasts it. It doesn't deny darkness, but it dares to light a candle anyway. Hope is what anchors us when the future feels uncertain, and what whispers to our souls when logic has no answers left. In the modern world, we are taught to hope in progress, in better technology, faster systems, smarter solutions. And while these things can improve life, they cannot fill the human heart. Because what the heart longs for is not just comfort, it's meaning. The philosopher Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, wrote that those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. He discovered that even in the most unbearable circumstances, hope is not found in circumstances, but in purpose. In America today, many are searching for that purpose again. People scroll endlessly, work tirelessly, buy constantly, and still feel a quiet emptiness that no screen or success can satisfy. That emptiness is not a flaw. It's a signal, a sacred hunger for something eternal. As St. Augustine said, our hearts are restless until they rest in you. Hope, then, is not optimism. Optimism says things will get better. Hope says, even if they don't, I will still believe. Optimism depends on results. Hope depends on relationship, with God, with one another, with the truth that love is stronger than loss. When you think about it, the greatest stories of hope are born from tragedy. Think of Nelson Mandela walking free after 27 years in prison, smiling instead of cursing. Think of the firefighters running into the Twin Towers on 9/11, carrying strangers down smoke-filled stairs. Think of a mother sitting beside her sick child, whispering prayers through tears. None of them knew what would happen next, but all of them believed that love was still worth choosing. Theologian Miroslav Volf once said that Christian hope is not the naive expectation that everything will be fine, but the courageous trust that whatever happens, God can make it meaningful. That's what separates hope from fantasy. It doesn't deny reality, it redeems it. It's the quiet conviction that even broken things can still become beautiful in the hands of God. Sometimes hope looks like action. When you donate, when you speak up for justice, when you forgive, when you start again after failure, you are living hope out loud. Hope is faith with its sleeves rolled up. It's what turns prayer into movement and belief into transformation. But hope also lives in stillness. It's there in the morning light that keeps showing up even after long nights. It's there in the steady heartbeat of someone who's been through loss and still chooses to love again. It's there in the whisper that says, keep going. Hope is quiet, but it is relentless. Science can measure the speed of light, but not the strength of hope. Yet research in neuroscience has shown that people who practice gratitude and prayer develop stronger resilience and emotional stability. Faith and hope literally rewire the brain, transforming fear into peace, despair into endurance. That's not myth, that's biology touched by mystery. And yet, hope asks something of us. It asks us to trust in what we cannot see. It invites us to believe that there is more to life than headlines, algorithms, or data. It dares us to imagine a tomorrow shaped not by fear, but by love. Because love, not money, not power, not fame, is what has always rebuilt the world. Look back through history. When darkness fell, there were always small lights that refused to go out. A teacher who refused to stop teaching. A nurse who refused to stop healing. A believer who refused to stop praying. Hope was never a mass movement. It was always a chain reaction of small, stubborn acts of goodness. In the heart of New York City stands a small bronze statue called Fearless Girl. She faces the towering, charging bull of Wall Street with her hands on her hips, unshaken, unafraid. That's what hope looks like. It's not the absence of fear, it's standing firm in front of it. It's believing that courage can coexist with trembling knees. The same truth lives in Scripture. When Peter stepped out of the boat onto the stormy water, he didn't wait for calm seas. He walked toward Jesus while the waves were still raging. That's hope, walking forward even when the storm hasn't stopped yet. And maybe that's what we're all being called to today, to live as witnesses of hope in a world drowning in cynicism, to be the ones who still believe in forgiveness when the world shouts revenge, to be the ones who still serve when others withdraw, to be the ones who still pray when others have given up. Because the truth is, hope is contagious. One act of kindness can spark another. One story of redemption can heal a generation of doubt. And one person's courage to believe can reignite faith in countless others. Hope does not deny the pain of the world. It defies it. It refuses to let suffering have the final word. Because beyond every horizon, there is still sunrise. Beyond every grave, there is still resurrection. And beyond every heartbreak, there is still the God who whispers, "Behold, I make all things new." So if the world feels uncertain, remember this. The future is not something that happens to us, it's something that happens through us. Every choice we make, every act of compassion, every prayer of faith, is building the tomorrow our children will inherit. We are not passive passengers in history. We are co-creators with God. And as long as love endures, hope will never die. Because hope is not the dream that everything will be perfect. Hope is the decision to believe that even when it isn't, God is still good. Dear friends, every sunrise reminds us that darkness never wins for long. No matter how heavy the night feels, the light always finds a way back. And maybe that's what it means to live by faith. Not to deny the shadows, but to carry the light through them. We live in an extraordinary time, an age of information, innovation, and instant connection. We can send a message across the world in seconds, yet struggle to truly listen to the person sitting beside us. We have access to more knowledge than any generation before us, and yet many hearts feel lost in the noise. The question is no longer, can we reach the world, but can we still reach each other? The great paradox of our century is this: we are surrounded by light, and yet many feel in the dark. We scroll through endless screens searching for meaning, but true light doesn't come from pixels. It comes from presence, from truth, from love. The light that changes the world begins not in the sky, but in the soul. Faith and reason, the two wings we spoke of earlier, are meant to lift us into that light. Faith gives us vision. Reason gives us direction. Without faith, we lose purpose. Without reason, we lose balance. But together, they guide humanity toward what John Paul II called the fullness of truth. And that truth isn't an idea. It's a person. It's the God who became human to show us what love looks like in flesh and blood. In the modern world, many see religion as outdated, a relic of the past, incompatible with science or progress. But history tells another story. It was faith that built hospitals before there was healthcare, faith that inspired art before there were museums, faith that birthed universities before there was Google. True faith has never been afraid of knowledge, because truth, wherever it's found, always leads back to God. The challenge today is not that people have stopped believing, it's that they've stopped belonging. Loneliness has become the quiet crisis of our time, and yet the gospel still whispers the same invitation: you are not alone. To live as a witness of faith and love is to remind others that they are seen, valued, and loved, not for what they produce, but for who they are. You don't need a pulpit to preach that. You only need a heart that listens, a life that loves, and a courage that keeps showing up. Every day gives us a chance to be light, When you forgive someone who hurt you, you bring light. When you speak truth with kindness, you bring light. When you care for the poor, the lonely, the forgotten, you bring light. When you stand for what's right, even when it costs you, you bring light. And when you simply refuse to give up on love, you become the living reflection of the light that never fades. One of the most powerful things Jesus ever said was also one of the simplest. You are the light of the world. Not you might be, not you could be, but you are. It's not a command, it's an identity. He was reminding us that God doesn't just work through saints and heroes. He works through ordinary people who choose to love extraordinarily. In America today, where public debate often feels louder than compassion, being light means listening without judgment. It means standing in truth without losing tenderness. It means shining in workplaces, schools, and homes, not by preaching religion, but by practicing humanity. Because people might argue with your beliefs, but they can never argue with your love. The 20th century writer Madeleine L'Engle once said, "We draw people to Christ not by loudly discrediting what they believe, but by showing them a light that is so lovely they cannot help but ask the source of it." That is our calling, to live in such a way that our lives themselves become invitations, quiet, radiant, and real. Reason tells us to seek truth. Faith tells us to live it. Love tells us to share it. And together they form the symphony of a life that truly matters. But being light doesn't mean we never struggle. Even candles tremble in the wind. Even stars are surrounded by night. Faith doesn't eliminate doubt. It carries it with grace. Reason doesn't erase mystery. It bows before it. And love doesn't avoid suffering. It transforms it. That's the kind of light the world needs now. Not flawless, but faithful. Maybe the greatest witness of faith today is not a sermon, but endurance. The quiet perseverance of those who keep believing, keep serving, keep loving when no one is watching. Because every small act of goodness, every prayer whispered in secret, every sacrifice made in silence, adds another spark to the fire that keeps humanity alive. And so, my friends, as this journey draws to a close, remember this. You don't have to change the whole world to shine. You just have to light your corner of it, because one light can guide another, and soon, darkness has no place left to hide. So go, live your faith out loud, think deeply, love wildly, forgive freely, and wherever life takes you, be the light that reminds others that God is still near. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more light. And that light, dear friends, begins with you. Dear friends, as we come to the end of this journey together, take a deep breath. Let the noise around you fade for a moment. Feel the quiet rhythm of your own heartbeat, that steady reminder that life itself is a gift. Every beat is mercy. Every breath is grace. Over these past reflections, we've walked through storms, wrestled with reason, searched for peace, and rediscovered hope. We've learned that faith isn't about escaping reality. It's about seeing reality through the eyes of love. And that love, the kind that never gives up and never runs dry, is what makes life truly sacred. Perhaps the greatest miracle isn't in parting seas or moving mountains, but in the small, hidden moments when a human heart chooses goodness over bitterness, truth over convenience, forgiveness over pride. That's where God lives. Not in the thunder, but in the whisper. Not in the grand gestures, but in the quiet, daily yes. To love. We began this journey asking how faith and reason can coexist. Now we know. They were never enemies. Faith gives reason its purpose. Reason gives faith its depth. Together they form the bridge between what we know and what we hope for, between earth and heaven, between the human and the divine. In Fides et Ratio, Pope John Paul II wrote that humanity advances not by technology or power, but by wisdom, by hearts that seek truth and hands that build peace. And every one of us in our own corner of the world is part of that sacred work. Because faith is not a theory, it's a relationship. And love, when lived out, becomes theology in motion. Maybe that's what Jesus meant when he said, "You are the light of the world." He didn't ask us to be perfect. He asked us to be present. He didn't command us to shine brighter than others, only to shine where we are. A single candle doesn't chase away all darkness, but it can guide the lost home. And sometimes that's enough. In this world of constant headlines and temporary noise, may we dare to live differently, to pause before judging, to listen before reacting, to love before retreating. Because compassion is not weakness. Forgiveness is not foolishness. Hope is not naive. They are the language of heaven, spoken through human lips. The philosopher Edith Stein once said, "The world doesn't need what you have, it needs who you are." And who you are, dear friend, is not an accident. You were created intentionally, beautifully, purposefully, a reflection of divine creativity. When you live with faith, think with reason, and act with love, you become the message that God is still writing into the world. We often ask, where is God in all this? But perhaps the better question is, where am I in what God is doing? Because maybe God's answer to the pain of the world is not an event, it's a person. Maybe it's you with your imperfect heart and your fragile courage. You with your willingness to love when it's hardest. You with the quiet light that shines through every act of kindness. As we leave this space, let's carry that light with us into our families, our workplaces, our communities, into every conversation and every decision. Let it guide how we speak, how we forgive, how we dream. And when the world feels dark again, as it sometimes will, may we remember that no night lasts forever. The dawn always comes. Because faith is not about never falling, it's about rising again. Reason is not about having all the answers, it's about asking the right questions with humility. And love, the greatest of all, is not about being unbroken, but about choosing to give even after being broken. So as the final words of this journey settle in your heart, hear this blessing. May you walk in the light of truth and never lose wonder. May your mind stay curious, your heart stay soft, and your hands stay open. May your life speak the language of mercy in a world that has forgotten how to listen. And may you always know, even in your weakest moments, that God is near, that grace is real, and that love still wins. And when you look in the mirror tomorrow, may you see not just your reflection, but the reflection of the one who has loved you from the beginning and will love you to the end. Because that, dear friends, is what faith truly is. Not the absence of doubt, but the presence of light. Not the end of the story, but the start of eternity. Dear friends, there comes a time in every believer's life when heaven feels silent. You pray and nothing seems to happen. You ask and there's no answer. You wait and all you hear is the sound of your own heartbeat echoing in the dark. It's in those moments, the moments when faith feels fragile and God feels far away, that our trust is truly tested. Every generation has wrestled with this mystery. The Psalms cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Job sat in ashes and asked why the righteous suffer while the wicked prosper. Even Jesus himself, hanging on the cross, felt the weight of silence from the Father he loved. Silence, it seems, is not the absence of God, but often the space where God speaks most deeply. We live in an age where silence feels almost unbearable. We fill every quiet moment with sound, music, podcasts, scrolling feeds, endless notifications. We've become allergic to stillness, afraid that if we stop moving, we might have to face ourselves. But the truth is, silence has always been God's first language. Creation began not with noise, but with a whisper, "Let there be light." And perhaps before God speaks again, he invites us to rediscover that stillness. In the spiritual tradition of the Desert Fathers, early Christian monks who sought solitude in the Egyptian wilderness, silence was not emptiness, it was presence. They believed that when the world grows too loud, the soul forgets how to listen. So they retreated into silence, not to escape life, but to encounter it more honestly. They learned that God's voice isn't always in the earthquake or the fire, but in the gentle breeze that follows. Modern psychology says something similar. When we sit in stillness, our nervous system begins to recalibrate. Our frantic thoughts slow down. Our emotional defenses soften. We start to notice what's really happening within us, the fears, the wounds, the longing for meaning. And often it's there, in the vulnerability of silence, that healing begins. Science and spirituality, once seen as opposites, are now discovering they've been describing the same mystery in different languages. But silence is not easy. When prayers go unanswered, the human heart instinctively fills the gap with fear. Maybe God doesn't care, maybe I'm not worthy, maybe faith was a mistake. Those lies grow in the shadows if we let them. But if we stay, if we sit long enough with the silence, something begins to change. We start to realize that silence is not rejection, it's invitation. God is not punishing us with distance, He's preparing us for depth. There's a story about Mother Teresa that few people know. After her death, letters were found where she confessed feeling spiritual emptiness for decades, a darkness she described as the silence of God. Yet she never stopped serving, never stopped loving, never stopped believing. That's what made her holiness radiant. Not that she always felt God, but that she remained faithful even when she didn't. Faith is not the absence of doubt. Faith is choosing to stand firm when the ground beneath you shakes. In the American spirit, we admire action, the doing, the achieving, the measurable results. But faith is often the opposite of control. It's surrender. It's trusting that God is working even when we can't see His hand. As C.S. Lewis once wrote, when you are learning to walk and God sees you taking your first steps, He may let you fall, not to harm you, but to teach you how to stand on your own. That's what silence often is, not divine neglect, but divine formation. Look at a seed buried in the soil. From the outside it looks dead, silent, forgotten, unseen. But beneath the surface, something sacred is happening. The darkness is doing its work. Roots are forming. Life is preparing to break through. That's how God works in silence, not absent but active in ways we cannot yet perceive. And maybe that's what you need to hear today, that the silence you're in is not the end of your story. It's the soil of something new. Faith is being willing to stay in the dark long enough to let the roots of hope take hold. In American culture, we often measure worth by visibility, what's seen, what's shared, what's applauded. But God often does His greatest work in secret. The unseen prayer, the unspoken kindness, the private act of forgiveness. These are the seeds of eternity sown in the soil of ordinary days. So if heaven feels silent tonight, maybe it's not because God isn't speaking. Maybe it's because He's listening. Listening to the cries you can't even put into words. Listening to the ache behind your questions. Listening to the sound of your fragile yes, the quiet courage of a heart that keeps believing. There's beauty in that kind of faith, the kind that holds on when feelings fade, that chooses to love when it doesn't understand, that keeps walking even when the path disappears. This is not blind faith, it's luminous faith. Faith that shines not because it never doubts, but because it never gives up. Theologian Henry Nouwen once said, "When we are broken and feel our wounds are all we have, we begin to see that God's silence is not indifference, but His invitation to share in His loneliness for the world." That loneliness, that ache, is what unites us to the suffering heart of Christ, the God who was silent on the cross, yet whose silence changed all of history. So tonight, if the silence feels unbearable, remember this. The same God who was silent on Friday spoke resurrection on Sunday, and He hasn't stopped speaking since. Hold on, keep trusting. The silence will not last forever. And when it finally breaks, when grace blooms where pain once lived, you'll realize that the voice you were waiting for had been whispering inside your heart all along. Dear friends, every generation stands at the edge of tomorrow, asking the same question. What kind of world will we leave behind? We live in an age of breathtaking possibility. Technology can now do what once seemed divine: heal the sick, connect the distant, even map the human soul. Artificial intelligence writes our songs, explores our skies, and predicts our desires before we know them. Yet in all our progress, a quiet anxiety lingers. Have we grown wiser or just faster? Have we built smarter machines but forgotten how to be more human? Faith has always been humanity's compass through the unknown. It reminds us that innovation without love becomes manipulation. Knowledge without conscience becomes chaos. And progress without purpose becomes peril. Faith doesn't limit the future. It illuminates it. Because belief is not a wall that blocks discovery. It's a bridge that guides discovery toward meaning. The 21st century has given us incredible tools, but tools alone can't tell us what's right or wrong. They can calculate, but they cannot care. They can measure, but they cannot love. And so the great challenge before us is not just to advance our technology, but to deepen our theology, to ensure that as our machines grow smarter, our hearts grow softer. Albert Einstein, though not conventionally religious, once said, "Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind." He understood that truth is one, whether found in the laboratory or the sanctuary. Faith and reason were never meant to compete. They were meant to complete each other. Reason discovers how the universe works. Faith reminds us why it matters. We've reached a moment in history where we can shape almost anything, except perhaps our own hearts. We can build skyscrapers that touch the clouds, but we still struggle to build peace between neighbors. We can transplant organs, but not heal resentment. We can communicate across continents, yet marriages fall apart in the same living room. What does this tell us? That the future we dream of will not be created by the power of code, but by the power of character. That's why faith matters more than ever. Because faith asks the questions that algorithms can't. It asks, what is the value of a soul? What does it mean to love someone who can't give anything back? What are we building? And who are we becoming? Without those questions, the future becomes a mirror, reflecting our intelligence, but not our integrity. When you think about the great movements that changed history, the abolition of slavery, the fight for civil rights, the call for justice and equality, each began not in politics, but in the human conscience. And the conscience, when fully alive, always points towards something greater than itself. It is the echo of the divine written within the human heart. In America, the story of progress has always been intertwined with faith. From the pilgrims seeking freedom to worship, to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. preaching a dream rooted in Scripture, to millions of ordinary citizens whose quiet prayers shaped communities, the soul of this nation has always been stirred by belief. Not belief as ideology, but as vision. Faith has never been the enemy of progress. Faith is the moral compass that keeps progress humane. Today, as we stand before revolutions of artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and digital realities, we must ask ourselves, will these tools serve humanity or will humanity serve them? Faith calls us to remember that human beings are not data points, they are souls. Each life carries infinite worth, not because of what it produces, but because of who created it. And that truth must guide every law, every invention, every decision about the world we are building. There's a story told about a scientist who once said to God, "We no longer need you. We can create life ourselves." God smiled and said, "All right, let's see it." The scientist reached down to grab a handful of dirt, and God replied, "Wait, get your own dirt." It's a simple story, but a profound reminder that everything we create begins with something given. We are not owners of creation, we are stewards of it. Faith helps us remember that the future is not ours to control, but ours to care for. And perhaps that's the real meaning of hope. Not a naive wish that things will get better on their own, but a courageous decision to build better with the light we've been given. Hope is faith in action. It's the mother planting a tree she'll never sit under. It's the teacher believing in a child who doesn't yet believe in himself. It's the scientist who researches not for fame, but for healing. Hope builds bridges the world cannot see yet, and faith gives us the strength to walk across them. If you look closely, you'll see that every major advancement of humanity was born from a moral question, not a mechanical one. It was never can we, but should we? Faith is what whispers that second question into the heart of progress. Because not everything possible is permissible, and not everything new is necessary. The future will belong not just to those who invent, but to those who discern. And so, as we look ahead, maybe the call is not to fear technology or idolize it, but to humanize it. To make sure that as we create smarter machines, we also raise wiser people. To make sure that every innovation serves life, not replaces it. And to remember that the future will never be brighter than the light that burns within us. The theologian Teilhard de Chardin once said, "The future belongs to those who give the next generation reason to hope." That reason begins here. With you, with me, with the faith that even a small act of love can ripple across eternity. The future of humanity will not be written by silicon, but by spirit. Not by circuits, but by conscience. Not by code, but by compassion. Because in the end, what makes us human is not our power to create, but our choice to love. So as we step into tomorrow, may we do so with open minds and open hearts, with reason in our hands and faith in our hearts. May we never stop questioning, never stop learning, and never stop believing that love is still the most advanced technology the world has ever known. And when the day comes that machines can think, let them think about truth. But let us, the children of God, keep living it. Dear friends, as this journey draws to its quiet close, I invite you to pause for a moment, wherever you are. Maybe you're driving home after a long day, sitting in the stillness of your room, or walking beneath the stars. Take a breath. Let the noise of the world fall away and listen. Not with your ears, but with your heart. Because right now, in this very moment, the God who shaped galaxies is looking at you. Not with judgment, but with love. He knows your story. He has seen your battles, your doubts, your hidden tears, your quiet hopes. And through it all, he whispers the same eternal truth. You are loved beyond measure. The entire journey we've shared, through faith and reason, silence and storms, forgiveness and hope, has been about this one truth, that God's love is not something you earn. It is something you are invited to receive. It is the light that finds you in the darkness, the peace that meets you in the chaos, the grace that holds you when everything else fades. In a world chasing noise and novelty, his love remains the one constant, patient, present, powerful. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply waits, like the dawn that always returns after the longest night. And maybe that's what faith really is, not certainty, but surrender. Not having all the answers, but trusting the one who is the answer. So together, let us pray. Heavenly Father, we come before you with hearts full of gratitude. Thank you for the gift of life, for the breath that sustains us, and for the quiet strength that carries us when we falter. Thank you for every listener here, for their journey, their questions, their faith that keeps reaching toward you. Lord, through the loving intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, our gentle Mother, we ask that you cover each person listening with her mantle of protection and peace. May her tender love guide them when the road feels uncertain, and her example teach them to say yes to you in every moment of life. And through the prayers of Saint Joseph, protector of families and model of faith, we ask your blessing upon every home, every heart, every dream. Grant wisdom to the confused, healing to the broken, courage to the weary, and hope to all who wait in silence. Pour out, O Lord, your abundant grace upon each listener, their families, their work, their deepest desires. Let your Holy Spirit fill their lives with peace that this world cannot take away. Let them feel, right now, that they are seen, known, and loved by you, eternally and completely. Dear friends, as we close this time together, may your faith grow deeper, your reason grow wiser, and your love grow stronger. May you walk into tomorrow with joy in your step and light in your soul, knowing that you are never alone, because the same God who holds the universe holds you too, tenderly, faithfully, forever. And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May his love surround you, uplift you, and guide you every day of your life. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear friends, if this message has touched your heart today, I invite you, from wherever you are in the world, to help share that light. Let's build a community of faith, compassion, and hope that reaches every corner of the earth. Together, let's show the world that God's love is still alive, through us. So please click subscribe, leave a comment below, and share this message with someone who might need it today. Because every time you share a word of faith, you become part of the story God is still writing, a story of love that never ends. May God bless you. May Mary, our Mother, and Saint Joseph watch over you. And may the peace of Christ remain with you, always.